Hi, thanks. Shelley, you touched on a topic, and actually I wanted to touch on it a little earlier, but it's the wheat starch component. Now we have some amazing products that since I've been on the job, people from the Celiac Association positively and negatively have reached out to me about. And I'm still like it's as clear as mud right now for me as to which direction I need to go with this. We have products that have certified gluten-free wheat starch that are amazing, yet I hear consumers want the products, and the Celiac Association has warned me about bringing them in. So this is where I was hoping to get some clarification on the use of the certified gluten-free wheat starch in ingredients. In the ingredients, it says contains wheat with the
Right.
asterisk, and the very first ingredient it says gluten-free, certified gluten-free wheat starch. I don't know if you can help
Great
me with
question. That's Carmen from Shar. As you know, in the States, they have the gluten-free croissants that people rave about when I'm in the US and love it, and yet other people are concerned. Just to set the stage here, there's three types of wheat starch. There's very basic, ordinary wheat starch that's used to thicken. It's in things like Pringles potato chips that make them nice so they'll fit in the canister. That's your sort of standard wheat starch that's loaded with gluten, so that's a no. Then there's your modified wheat starch, which just is modified so that it'll do a better job of thickening or something else, and that's still got gluten in it. And then there's your specially processed wheat starch, as you mentioned, and under the 10 parts per million. And so the amount in the food, it would definitely fit under the 20 parts. So technically, it is processed to remove gluten, but then, Michael, the rule for gluten-free is it cannot contain any gluten-containing protein. So can you elaborate? I'm going to ask Michael. Could you bring a mic to Michael, Carmen, or give? Yeah, just so Michael, I'd like you to touch on that for us so that I'm saying the right thing here.
Yeah, sure, Shelley. So that highly processed wheat starch would be allowed in gluten-free foods. It would have to be labeled as wheat starch in the list of ingredients. But that was part of those changes that took place in 2012, and you had touched on that. Before 2012, the gluten-free regulations said you couldn't have one of those gluten sources or any part thereof, so it wouldn't have been allowed at that point. But with the new regulations that are specific to the presence of the gluten protein, the highly processed wheat starch would be allowed, or is allowed, in gluten-free foods. But again, would have to be listed as wheat starch.
And does it have to have an asterisk or anything like in the U.S. where you have to say that this is specially processed and meets the rule for gluten-free? Would that be required on in a Canadian labeled product?
No, there's no requirement for any further text around that. I think it would be permitted as long as it was truthful,
Right.
which it is. So that kind of additional labeling, I think, would be permitted, but it's not required.
Okay, so just a show of hands, how many people, if we could have the Char gluten-free croissants that are made with especially processed wheat starch, how many are all in?
They're delicious.
How many are saying no thank you?
I just need to understand
I'm
the
charging
concern.
him sponsorship for this.
No, I'm just concerned because I don't want to bring a product to Canada that people aren't going to eat because they're concerned about the ingredients.
Right.
We're bringing products that people want, not people are afraid of.
But it will sure bring confusion.
It'll bring confusion.
It will surely bring confusion.
Well, the may
after all
contains,
will-
if we're having trouble with, if we saw the results of may contain wheat in a gluten-free food and not understanding that, I think it could be a challenge from the education point. And I know where you're coming from, Carmen. You're in a sort of a rock and a hard spot. I totally get it. And as a dietitian,
CCA has even warned me initially not to do it.
yeah, so I think it's kind of, there's no good, hard, fast rule on that one. So, but I guess you could bring it in, but I think you're more worried about as a brand, would people doubt your other gluten-free products that don't have the wheat starch? So, good question. Okay, where do we go next? Jerry. Hello, Jerry.
Hello. I just have to respond a little bit to Inez's speech. Three specific or four specific points. Number one, we've been aware of arsenic in rice for 20 years. And there are specific areas of the U.S. where rice comes from where you just simply don't buy rice. A lot of the snack foods and pastas and things like that use, excuse me, use rice from Louisiana, Mississippi, down in the southern area, which is where a lot of the arsenic is combined. Our rice comes from Northern California, and we have it tested on a regular basis for arsenic. The only issue that we have a little bit is the standards are a little bit fuzzy in terms of what is permitted, but it is an order of magnitude lower than short grain, long grain rice from the south. Medium grain from California is definitely, and we've been through this 4 or 5 times, just double checking to make sure that there's no arsenic or that it's almost untraceable. So it isn't necessarily a rice-based thing, it's a specific geographic thing.
Good
So that's something. And to the extent that you were looking for cheap products and snack foods, maybe that's a reason why it shows up in some foods. Second point, and this one is kind of near and dear to my heart, and that's we've enriched our flours for 20 years. We have the same enrichment profile as any conventional grain. In addition to that, when you talk about carbohydrates in the diet, for the last 15 years, we've added protein, we've added fiber, generally from pulses to build up the nutritional values of the product. And in addition to that, we don't use preservatives, trans fats, some of the negative things that you find in conventional bread. So when someone suggests that there's some negative aspects about gluten-free food, I take kind of issues with that not necessarily the case. If you look at our nutritional panels versus conventional bread, you'll find that, gee, that's pretty good. And by the way, there's a reduced sugar and everything, so that some of us have been really working on making a conventional equivalent healthy as possible, given the fact that, yes, you're short of fiber and you're short of all these other things, so we try to bring back more of that into the bread through additives of pulse proteins and pulse fiber. So just wanted to sort of say.
No, and this isn't on. Oh, well. Thank you for that. Those are great comments. And of course, in 10 minutes to try to cover these hot topics is difficult. So we do acknowledge that there are manufacturers that go above and beyond. And as a clinician, I do always educate my families to read labels, and I teach them how to read labels so that they know what it is that they're trying to understand about a product to make an informed decision. Absolutely. And I think that's key. It's also something that as a mentor in the dietetic community, I also encourage my colleagues to do as well. Not everyone has the same knowledge base, and we're working on addressing those gaps. Having said that, there still are some issues, particularly amongst infants and children who radiate to the same blueberries and hot dogs all day long for anyone who has little kids, right? So working with adults where you can have the opportunity to rationalize and sort of speak to things. I think the challenges around nutritional adequacy of the gluten-free diet for pediatrics in particular is a bit more challenging as I've experienced. But thank you for those who do go above and beyond to make a better gluten-free product. Absolutely.
I just want to add in too that when I look at the number of products in Canada, All But Gluten by Weston's, Kinnikinnick, Energy Foods in the States, and some of the SHARs have some additional ingredients, but the vast majority of manufacturers are not enriching. And when I talked to Catelli and Barilla and all of them in the States, I said, how come you're not enriching? Because you're permitted to do that in Canada. And they said, well, because we have one plant and we have to do it for both countries. And so we are up against the challenge of getting products. But Jerry's tired of hearing me. He's finally listened to me. No, I'm just kidding. I said, Jerry, please keep enriching, and look for more products like your muffins and other things, so that at least when someone is eating a gluten-free product, they are getting some nutritional value. So I applaud the companies that are doing that, and I just keep preaching at more of them to try and consider doing that. Or the companies like when we have the oats companies, the purity protocols and that, at least we can get some fiber sources and some good nutrition.
I just wanted to say something on those two topics. One is, it's really important when you're talking about diets not to consider an individual food that people eat, but actually what they eat over the course of the day.
Yes.
And so we really need better studies where we look at food records and what people are eating.
Agreed.
And I think when we look at that data, we're going to get a bit of a different story. The other thing I was going to mention is that I've been working with a group that does a lot of work on arsenic in rice. We've submitted 4 grants, none of which have been funded. Half the time they say it's not clear there's a problem. The other half the time they say there's such a problem, why are you studying this? So we haven't quite found the sweet spot yet. But definitely another good resource is Arsenic in You, which is a good website about arsenic mitigation.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that.
So we had someone else who was at the mic, and I just want to invite you back. I think. to reward your patience.
Thanks. Betty Evers from Moncton, New Brunswick. Just a quick question for Shelley. On the picture with the grain in your hand, how do we, if we pour out our lentils, how do we detect anything that doesn't belong there?
Yeah, you
What-
have to have a train. It's subtle,
Yes.
but you can usually tell that. I mean,
Okay.
the shape. Lentil is a much more round and thinner, and
Okay.
the barley and the rye and the wheat have kind of got more dimension to around it, and you can definitely see that it's there. But that's why we also suggest washing the pulses, because if you've got, as you know, you don't get perfectly whole kernels of barley and rye and wheat. They can be cracked and half schmucked, and you know, that coating of the dust from the gluten-containing
Okay.
grain. So that's why we say wash your pulses and sort through. But I'm more concerned when I was at the Natural Products Food Expo show in Anaheim in March, 90,000 people and thousands of exhibits, and I was on a mission for looking at oat products particularly, and seeing the claims and how they're made. But I also was looking at the big trend is pulse pasta, you know, so chickpea pasta and lentil pastas and stuff. And that's my bigger concern. Michael, I think that would be one for studying now that we're seeing more of those, because of once they're ground up into a flour, it's hard to find where's Waldo, as you said in that picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got another question here. Does anyone else want to stick their hand up, because we're starting to head into, okay, so one here, and then we'll see if we have time for any more questions, depending on where these ones go.
Hi, Katie Jensen, Beyond Celiac. Thank you for fascinating presentations, both of you. So to me, this conversation is bringing us back around to the beginning of the day, where we were talking about potential therapeutic options, protecting against accidental gluten exposure. And with all the may contain and processed in a facility, it seems to me like that is even further showing the need for these sort of options. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts as dietitians about what that might mean for the community.
Great question. That's exactly what I thought about when I was reviewing the survey and then listening this morning. Like you say, you know, people think they're following a gluten-free diet. They're trying. They're depending on the gluten-free claim. They're depending on the label. And that's why I made that concluding statement that people were saying. That was a general theme, is that our health depends on knowing that when we eat this product, when we look on the label, we can trust it. If it's certified, it should be gluten-free. If it's, you know, no gluten in there and no gluten-containing ingredients, is there no contamination? So I believe, you know, we know that people go out to eat. I get sick. I eat out. I'm traveling all the time, and I'm the expert, and I know what I'm doing. But I mean, I'm constantly. It's interesting. On this weekend, I was in Minneapolis, sitting at an open chef. So the chefs were right in front of me, and I could see. Probably I could have had, if I had my camera and video, I could have had 29 touch points of where all the oopses went, and watching, and you know, and I'm aware of a lot of these, but you don't always see the kitchen, and you're not in the kitchen. So we know that's a big area for cross-contamination. But my question is, what about our food supply? With more global, as Paul mentioned, more ingredients. Jerry's talking about garlic coming in from China that maybe's got peanuts or lots of peanuts, and trying to find sorghum that's safe. I'm really questioning, you know, but we don't want to be fear-based, because people have enough things to worry about. But I think as dietitians and people in the food industry and working with government and regulatory, we really do need to put this on a high level of our radar screens, because if this is what we have until you come up with some solutions for the vaccines and all these drugs, and that they would work. And that's why some people put in the survey, please give us a treatment other than the gluten-free diet, or even a pill that I could take when I go out to eat, just to be on the safe side so I don't get sick. And then how many people don't respond, don't have symptoms, and they don't even know that they're getting gluten. So until they get the G1P done in the urine or stool and go, oops, how many of your patients that were contaminated? So I think we still have a lot more work to do with the food industry, and this is a great start today to get some of the food industry here. But I'm not so concerned about the people that are doing it right, the Shars, the Enjoy Lives, the Kinnicknicks, and Only Oats and Abina and that, because they get it. We're preaching to the choir. We need to be working with other manufacturers and industry, and really working in that area. So that's a long-winded answer, but Ines?
Oh, I was just gonna, so to all of Shelley's points, I agree. I was just gonna comment to say that I think in clinical practice, I see the role of these medicines being adjunctive right now. And so I think having individuals with celiac disease feel like they'll be able to eat a regular gluten-containing diet, we're definitely not there yet. So we do have to work now on improving knowledge, labeling, ingredients, everything that's in there that's currently not being disclosed, because I really can't genuinely help the people that I work with if I myself am falling into the same traps as Shelley here, and people are asking me for advice and I don't know where to guide them. I get in touch with Health Canada, I get in touch with CFIA, I'm getting no responses, no answers, no change. So I still see this as an exciting time in terms of innovation and medicine, and I see it having great potential, but I still think we have a lot to advocate for to help individuals around the strict, we'll call it the strict gluten-free therapy.
We're down to the wire. Okay, so you had a question here.
Yeah.
Shelley, what's hydrolyzed barley protein and is it gluten-free?
No, you can hydrolyze wheat, rye, or barley, and other starches. You can use acid or enzymes to break it down, and it does certain things, but it still has gluten protein, which is not allowed. So hydrolyzed wheat protein, hydrolyzed barley protein would be a no-no.
Merci.
You're welcome.
That was efficient.
That was a quick one. Oh, it means we can do
Wow,
another
okay.
question, right?
Who else has a question? Well, we've got it.
Everybody's
I
tired.
think I
Oh,
was
yes,
gonna
go
go.
over here. Jessica?
Okay, mine's very specific. Do either of you have any experience in type 1 diabetes and celiac disease and helping families cope with like both of those things all at once, and how do you best prioritize or approach that with families?
Well, I did some research with Suzanne Simpson, who used to work at Sick Kids and unfortunately passed away, and she had type 1 diabetes on a pump. And she worked with Dr. Peter Green and another dietitian, Nancy Jaffe, in California. And we did a study looking at diabetes and celiac and some of the issues, and clearly just the screening alone, whether people were even paying attention to look for celiac or type 1 diabetes and celiac. And there's not a lot of resources. The CCA used to have, growing up, celiac and diabetes. We need some work in that. There are a few resources out there. I know Sick Kids is doing some stuff that you can comment, but yeah, it's a challenge. And one of the things I did in my book in this last edition is one of the tables is I put in the carb values and the fiber values for the common gluten-free grains and flours and starches, because people, as you know, you do a formula on how much fiber versus carbs and all that, but people were asking me for that kind of information. So it is a challenge. I used to be a diabetes educator for 15 years, so that was near and dear to my heart, and understand it's incredibly challenging because you can't use the same rules and carb counting and all the things you do as easily when you've got to deal with the gluten-free products because of the other ingredients. But do you want to comment about gluten-free?
Yeah, I was going to say, so certainly at Sick Kids, we have a lot of support from our endocrinology group. So we do have a dedicated RD that works in the clinic that has done a lot of work alongside us. And there is a resource book that we have for children with type 1 and stuff. So happy to share that with anyone. We're more than excited to share what we've learned. It is an obvious challenge. It's often, I'd say, crushing and devastating. So what we learned with the patients that were being screened and tested positive, they generally were asymptomatic. Mm-hmm. So maybe slightly a bit robust since starting their therapy for type 1 diabetes. And then on top of that, getting a new diagnosis where they couldn't understand why they had to be strictly gluten-free because they don't feel like anything's wrong. And they would always come back to me and say, but look, I'm gaining weight, And so it's been an ongoing challenge. And so we do have endocrinologists and gastroenterologists looking at that. And we've got some publications around that too to help support families with both therapies in this case.
Yeah. I think our challenge is the priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, which, if we can only pick one to work with the family, which one do we do first, right? Do we do gluten-free and try to do like better diabetes management next month or next week, or do we do it the other way around, or like?
Well, one of the things, I think it's like it is a catch-22 or chicken or the egg or whatnot, because we found that if a patient with type 1 was non-adherent to the strict gluten-free diet, their hemoglobin A1C was higher. So you kind of sort of need both at the same time is what we've learned. So
yeah.
and then just really just being sort of very transparent about it, and I would say extremely supportive.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we've got 4 minutes, and we've got 2 questions on the table. So Paul, do you want to go ahead, and then we'll see if we have time for another one.
Thank you. It's Paul here. I just want to commend you both for great presentations, both of you, and also wanted to make a couple of final comments before we depart today based on what I've heard, and sort of hopefully provide some comfort to everybody when they come away for the weekend. First of all, I just wanted to say that we're really fortunate living in Canada. Health Canada and CFIA, when we look at regulatory framework around the world when it comes to gluten-free. We're really lucky, number one.
Yes, we
Okay?
sure are.
So thank you for continually supporting this ongoing battle to CFIA and Health Canada. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there's no such thing as zero risk. And I think that we need to understand that. Whether it's a dedicated facility or a single ingredient, there's always risk of cross-contamination. So having gluten-free on an apple, it's not that far-fetched, okay? Especially for this community. The last thing I'd like to say is that when you look at certifications, the CCA has invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of energy to get to where it is today with their certification program. It's not been easy, and it's been a challenge, and it's been evolving as we go, and we learn from everything. We're continually being involved in projects with agriculture, within the grains community, to try to also, figure out the best middle-of-the-road, shall we say, solution to between a purity protocol and a mechanically sorted claim. So those are ongoing challenges, and we recognize that. But lastly, when you look at certifications, and thank you very much, Shelley, for showing us what you did up there, because it just proved to me that when you focus on testing alone, or you have a heavy focus on testing, again, it's a needle in a haystack. And you can test, but you can't test your way out of a foodborne or recall issue. So I want to assure everybody here that the gluten-free certification program that CCA has developed is the most robust third-party accredited management system in the world. It's the only one. And somebody made a point about small suppliers earlier. We do not have thousands and thousands and thousands of certification sites out there. And then one of the reasons is it's very rigorous and it's very tough to get that certification. So we're not making it easy on people, and we continually are getting asked, well, why can't we just send it out and get a test? Well, in our world, that doesn't work. We've got to look at FSMA in the US, we've got to look at preventive controls, we've got to look at the new Safe Food for Canadians Act. We look at the encouragement from Health Canada and CFIA to take preventive measures, and that's what we're focused on. Supply chain is key. COAs are not the silver bullet.
So just tell people COAs are certificate of analysis.
Right. From testing. So again, testing is, as I said earlier, the Kinetics of the world, the Joel's groups and so on, they're going well beyond regulatory requirements. They're going well beyond certification requirements. And kudos to those companies. But it has been proven through these management systems that you can produce safe food in a non-dedicated facility. But you can, and most of you are probably eating those products. I would say 80% of the products we're consuming are coming from non-dedicated facilities. It can be done, but again, you have to spend a lot of money as a manufacturer to make it work. And there's not a whole lot that are willing to do that, but some of them are. So I just wanted to make sure that you all were aware you have a great product, you have a great risk-based program, a management system approach, and all I can say is talk it up.
Thanks so much, and I want to say that I think people are not as concerned about those products. It's all the other ones that don't have a claim, and you're just trying to tell from the label. I think that was what that survey came in as health professionals. But I want to thank Michael Abbott from Health Canada and Misu and the team. We've had a wonderful relationship, and I think, Jocelyn, that's where we can be fortunate here in Canada. As you know, you're Canadian, so you get it. As I spend a lot of time in the US with a number of national celiac organizations, and we did have a champion in the FDA with a dietitian, Rhonda Kane, who ushered in the gluten-free rule in the States, but she retired. And unfortunately, I'm not thrilled, as you've talked to most of my colleagues, dietitians in the States, that we don't have champions for the celiac cause in the government in the US. We can't even get a response to a lot of things that are interesting, whereas Michael is always willing, and Health Canada is always willing to work with the CCA. And I think we have an amazing relationship here in Canada with the CCA and government, that we can talk and try to find solutions. It just takes longer because you've got to go through a lot of hoops, as Michael, we know this. It's not so easy. People don't understand. You just decide you want to make a change. It's got to go through a lot of steps. But that being said, I think that we've come a long way. When I I see the hockey puck bread that we used to tell patients had to eat. You're too young, you don't know that. But
kind. No, I
Jerry
do.
and I know that. We've been around a long time. It's improved dramatically, but we're not there yet. We have a ways to go, but we keep advocating, and that's why we need to talk it up and tell everybody to support the CCA with fundraising and giving donations and memberships, because that's what supports our research that we heard from some amazing researchers, and look where they are today because of our seed money and just the things that we're able to accomplish. So the motto of CCA, together we're better, and so we can be even better if more people support the CCA. And so encourage your people that are on Facebook to tell them to send some money to Melissa at the CCA. Melissa would take it gratefully from you, but not for you personally, but for the association. Anyways, thank you, Paul.
What a great place to leave it. So first of all, let's have a round of applause